The deadlift versus the Romanian deadlift. What are the main differences? Well, there are two big fundamental differences between each of these movements. And the first is going to be the biomechanics and kind of the movement patterns that each facilitates. One's going to have a slightly greater range of motion than the other. And the second difference, which we'll get to in this video, is the intent in which movement is performed. So let's talk about the biomechanical differences first. With the conventional deadlift, or just your standard deadlift for that matter, you're going to take a hip width stance, bend down, grab the bar, set the back, lift that bar, and stand up with it. You're going to return the bar back down to the ground. And now this returning portion to the ground is what separates the normal deadlift from the Romanian deadlift's range of motion. But what else is different about the movements? Well, let's look at the Romanian deadlift. So we discussed that the standard deadlift is picked up from the ground. How is the Romanian deadlift different? For starters, it's going to have a shorter range of motion, and to nuance it a little bit further, the hinge is going to be slightly different in this movement. So for the Romanian deadlift, most will perform them in the rack, so you'll lift, take a step back, and then ground the feet. The width of the feet are usually going to be generally pretty similar to the standard deadlift, and now instead of going all the way to the ground, you're going to think about maintaining that soft knee bend, pushing those hips back, and focusing on getting a stretch in the hamstrings. The moment you feel the lumbar start to round in, or flex for that matter, you're going to stand back up with that bar and extend the hips. This is what makes the Romanian deadlift fundamentally different than the conventional or standard deadlift. It's this focus here on the eccentric movement patterning. Now let's talk about the second difference, the intent of each movement, and how folks program them best for their goals and needs. So the second difference between the deadlift and the Romanian deadlift is how they're programmed and their intent of use. So right off the bat, a big difference between the two is with a standard or more conventional deadlift, they're going to be performed heavier. They focus a lot on the concentric portion of the deadlift, so the standing up portion, which is almost the exact opposite of what the Romanian deadlift does. The Romanian deadlift focuses a lot on the eccentric, which is something that often gets neglected, especially in heavier pulls, because we just can't focus on the same tempo and same composure and positioning as we can with the Romanian deadlift, which focuses on that nice strong hip hinge patterning. So right off the bat, the Romanian deadlift is going to have more of an eccentric focus, so the lowering portion or the stretching of the muscles, versus the conventional or standard deadlift that is going to be a little bit more reliant on the concentric and a little bit on the eccentric portion. So now, which movement is best, the deadlift or the Romanian deadlift? If your mind jumped to one or the other, then you need to check yourself for some personal biases, because from a top-down approach, both of these movements are equally great and hold a ton of benefit in a well-rounded strength training program. However, if you want to kind of pick which is best based on your current program, then there are a couple different ways to look at which you should be doing more of. One is with the sports specificity mindset, and the other is with the goals and needs mindset. Now let's talk about sports specificity. So when it comes to sports specificity of the deadlift and the Romanian deadlift, there really isn't a one-size-fits-all or a golden rule when it comes to programming them. One way to look at it, though, is just based on the specificity of the movements that you compete with. So for example, if you're a powerlifter and you're competing with a conventional deadlift, then obviously doing more conventional deadlifts and really strengthening that movement patterning is going to be a little bit better for you. For weightlifters and other athletes who really rely on a strong hip hinge, especially in the snatch and clean and jerk, then the Romanian deadlift might be a little bit heavier in programming. Now, that isn't to say that the conventional deadlift can't be programmed heavily for these athletes. It'll just come down to kind of your overall weaknesses. So now, which is best for your goals and needs, the deadlift or the Romanian deadlift? For this section, we're going to break it down into three different areas. One is your strength, one is a hamstring focus, and then three, we're going to look at a true beginner, which they should perform a little bit more of. So when it comes to overall strength, the deadlift is going to kind of outweigh the Romanian deadlift, and that's simply because you can load it a little bit heavier. The Romanian deadlift will still get you strong, but just in different ways. The deadlift is going to be a little bit of a better movement when it comes to focusing on just your overall general strength. The second way we're going to look at these two movements is with a hamstring focus. Now, the Romanian deadlift has a very heavy focus on the eccentric portion of the movement. You can add in tempos, pauses, you can really focus on that stretch of the hamstring. So if your goal is hamstring strength and growth, then the Romanian deadlift should find their way into your program a little bit more. The final way we'll look at these two movements is from a true beginner point of view. Which should you program first? One thing I often see beginners doing is just always opting for a deadlift. And one thing that can kind of come with this is that you're neglecting the eccentric loading pattern. So what usually breaks down in heavy deadlifts? Typically, it's the hinge. And what creates a strong hinge? The Romanian deadlift. So if you're a true beginner, program them evenly. Try to give an equal attention to both the deadlift for just overall strength, but then also the Romanian deadlift to really focus on the hamstring contractility, your hip hinge, and just building overall stronger positions throughout what is similar to a deadlift movement pattern. So to wrap it all up, the two main differences discussed in this video between the deadlift and the Romanian deadlift come down to the movement pattern differences and also the intent in which they're programmed. If you want to learn a little bit more on the deadlift and the Romanian deadlift, check out our versus article and Google BarBend Romanian deadlift versus deadlift.